because
Well,
it will. Oh,
we're gonna
Don't
we're
worry.
gonna
We can chop all this out. I wanted to
okay,
record this because you're saying all this good stuff, and
right.
I let's just start so that way we can get right into it.
oh, sure, sure. I'll be happy to. So what I was sharing was that I really feel like this was the part of my journey prior to understanding totally how to network that I was really missing. Like I was really missing this sort of key value that you get out of connecting good people with good people. I always thought that it was somewhat of a waste of time, or, how's that going to actually lead to anything? And you would not believe the stories I could tell you about these remarkable connections that I've made where people have gone on to do business together, completely independent of me. And it really, the only thing that I take the joy out of is the fact that I kind of started the ball rolling, right? Like I didn't do anything that was all that hard. It was so different than what I thought networking was going to be, because I really thought networking was about sort of that contrived, I'm going to stand in a room and try to find some way to strike up a conversation with somebody I'm just meeting. I'm like, do you want more creamer in your coffee? Like, that kind of thing that's just so not me. Like, right? Like I don't even put cream in my coffee, for crying out loud. I drink cold coffee, so I've got to go find ice to be able to make my coffee. So it just never felt like me. And I don't want to exchange business cards and let's go have lunch. Like that's just, again, that's not really what it's about.
I
To me,
love it.
I mean,
I,
networking is like trying to uncover a connection that you had no idea that you were even looking for, really. Like you talk about something like, oh, I see you're from Chicago, I've been to Chicago. Are you kidding? I grew up in Charlotte. Like there's these remarkable overlaying of our lives that we don't give ourselves credit for probably having with just about everybody we meet.
mhm.
There's a music common interest. Like I met one guy, I won't use his name, but I just talked to him last week, and I met him through networking. And turns out he is the biggest closet U2 fan you could ever want to know, which was wonderful because I was going to Vegas to see U2 at the Sphere. So this is a big wig with a big Fortune 500 company, and I'm sending him photos from the Sphere because I'm like, you're not going to believe this. I'm in the same room with Bono, and it was just so natural, right? Like we weren't sitting there talking about business forecasting and things that people sort of have in their mind that they have to talk about with everybody they meet. What you really need to do is to make an organic connection with something that interests them, that interests you. And meanwhile, your head is just spinning like, who can I connect them with? Who can I connect them with? And I find myself doing it so naturally now that I almost feel like I have to kind of hold back. Like, let me just give you one or two at a time. I can't connect you with everybody I know at once. Like I have to sort of pace myself, let them work those connections first, see if that leads to anything that's helpful for them. And sometimes they circle back, which is awesome. Thank you so much, Libby. But other times I just know people were doing it for me, and have done it for me for years. So why would I not want to try to do it for somebody else?
Right, right. Well, everyone that you are listening to is one of our favorite former clients, Libby Motto. Welcome, welcome, welcome to the Job Chicks podcast. My name is Melissa. I'm here with Brittany Fowler, and we are the Job Chicks. And today we have somewhat of a celebrity with us. She's certainly a celebrity around Browning Associates, and her name is Libby. And thank you so much for joining us today. You have a lot to talk about. You have an incredible experience to talk about that you've had with Browning a couple of times. And
Great.
we're so happy that you're going to share your story. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about you?
Oh gosh. Okay. So from the start, which is actually that's a probably not a way that I would start that. What I would probably say is, where would you like me to start? Because really, nobody wants to hear your whole story. I mean, I can string together a lot of wonderful memories, but Nobody wants to hear my whole story.
Well,
I'll just,
tell us what brought you to Browning and your experience. When we met, we clicked instantly. We had a great time
yeah.
networking. So tell us a little bit about your experience, why you came to Browning initially, what you were doing before that, what happened, you came to Browning, and then your experience.
Oh gosh. But okay, so that's a great way to frame it up because I was going to say really my sort of foray into networking didn't start until I got with Browning. And to say that I had sort of a inferior network is a joke. I had 200 connections maybe on LinkedIn, and most of them were people I didn't know. I mean, most of them were like from Madagascar or Zimbabwe and places I had never heard of, and I didn't know why they wanted to connect with me. And I sort of was treating it kind of like a Facebook. And when Browning first said, "You're going to have to network," I mean, I could have croaked. I was like, that is horrible. Like, I don't want to network. I've been hearing that my whole freaking life. Oh,
Mm.
Libby, you need to network more. I'm like, I treated it like it was a four-letter word. Like I was like, I don't want to do that because I couldn't envision myself going to these live after fives. And again, like all these manufactured sites where people try to gather and then appear to just want to be there to mingle when in fact they're really trying to figure out how to get business, right? And most of the people who show up are people who are just as desperate as we are to satisfy some sort of like preconceived notion of what networking looks like. And that's just not it. So, what I decided to do, and it was partly your influence on this, Melissa, you were really good about just saying, look, you just got to make networking yours, right? Whatever is authentic to you, the best way you can network is to be yourself authentically. So, in trying to network a different way. I mean, really, the it was just over a cell phone, right? I would hear that somebody wanted to talk to me. I wasn't really sure why, but then thought, well, what I'll do is just try to make a real connection with them, not so much about their job or where their interests lie professionally, but what's the sweet spot? Like, what's something that we can draw on? So again, I alluded to this, but like are we from the same part of the country? Do we have, common friends somehow? And I mean, I met a woman who I kid you not was able to I can't make this up. Once we realized she was from North Carolina and she wasn't living there at the time, we figured out that our moms were in the same class at UNC Greensboro at the same time. She was
Really?
able to open the yearbook and see that my mother was the secretary of the Young Republican Club and showed me a picture.
Crazy.
I said, my mom is a lifelong Democrat. I can't wait to tell her, which was such
That's
a
amazing.
because my mom had completely blocked that out of her head that she was ever a Republican. So I got the biggest kick out of that.
That's hilarious.
But I would have never done that had we not been trying to peel back the layers of, okay, here's who we are and here's what we present to the world, but who are we really, right? Because we're all just people. We're all just trying to figure this out. We're all at various points in our career, super successful and super not. Right. So when I came to Browning, I wasn't really in a good place. And so the first thing I had to do was to get the talk tracks out of my head, right? The ones that say, oh, I must not be good at my job. I haven't been able to click with this company and da 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 da. And what I had to really do was to quiet that and say, okay, but that's in the past. Where are we going from here? Because I can find my people. I just need to look in different places. And I think that's what Browning allowed me to do on a much bigger scale was to find people all over the country, and in some cases in other countries, who were a lot more like me and a lot more in tune with the way that I approach my business and the way I approach my life and what I wanted out of my life. And I felt like that was really a better part of the experience, I think, than any other, even though going into it, I was dreading it. I mean, full disclosure.
Yeah, I think everybody does because, and I know Brittany can attest to this, when we get a new client, they all think, oh my gosh, I got to network with people and I'm either an introvert or I got to ask people for a job. And, in the beginning, everybody has this misconception of really what networking should be, right?
Mhm.
Which is relationship building. People forget about that. They forget
Right.
that there's a human element to it. I know Brittany talks about that all the time with her clients.
Mm-hmm. Oh, 100% agree with that. And really, I think the other thing that Browning did immediately was say, don't ask people for a job,
Right.
right? Because you're asking for something that puts them in a position where if I'm not successful, they won't like me. Now, they may not say it to themselves quite that way, but that's part of the pressure that you feel when you're on the receiving end of someone who says, help me find anything. I just need a job. I just need a job.
Right.
I'm like, ask them about what got them where they are. What do you like about what you do? What does your journey look like? Right? I mean, because in the end of it all, they're going to likely be able to make those same connections in their own mind of, you know what, it was because I was sitting next to so and so at a meeting when we realized that the guy across the table was resigning, and we started talking about me moving into that position. And it all boils down to relationships. I've said this 100 times if I've said it once, which is companies don't hire people, people hire people.
Mm-hmm.
They do. So if you need to know more people. That's the name of it. You need to know more people, and you need to believe that the best way, in a lot of ways, to get something as valuable back is to give something valuable to them. So walking into a networking cold call, if you call it that, thinking through like, well, who can I introduce them to? Who can I connect them with? Right. And just be okay with it not always working out. But taking you back to the scenario about being asked for a job, that puts a lot of pressure on that person. But if you ask them for insight and then ask them for a connection, that's a little checkbox I can tick and say, I did something right. I did something good for somebody. I was able to connect two people. I can give you an example where I did this just last week. I'm here in Charlotte, two friends of mine who are fabulous veterans. One works in one area of the veteran world, counseling people with PTSD, and the other one works for an employment service that specializes in getting veterans jobs. I couldn't believe that I had the privilege of knowing both of these gentlemen for upwards of at least 10 years and that they didn't know each other
Mm-hmm.
because they're both fabulous networkers in their own right. And so I said, please let me do the honor of introducing two dynamite guys to one another. And that was just something I wanted to do. It was, what does that do for me? It it gives me that little endorphin rush.
Right.
When you get the phone hung up on 1,000 times a day or whatever for what you might do as your day job, especially if you're in sales, to be able to sort of like have that little victory of I introduced two really awesome people who I know are going to have a lot in common, and they're
Mhm.
going to run into each other everywhere now that they know each other. Because I'm sure they were before, but they didn't know each other. So,
Right. What I think what helps, and I'm sure Brittany will agree with me, is we talk about this on a daily basis, as you know.
right.
We're talking to clients every single day about this, but you were an actual client who took these tools and put them into use. You utilized everything that we gave you, and you're a testimony to it really does work. When you are framing your conversations for relationship building, it really does work. And when people hear it from an actual client or a former client, it hits differently.
Well,
It's
yeah.
we're the teacher, right? And when you hear it from a student, it completely hits differently and they go, oh, well, maybe it really does work, right?
But
When you
it doesn't necessarily work the first time, right?
Right.
And it doesn't necessarily work every time, even after you're comfortable with it.
Right.
So, I share with people if we had that kind of attitude when we were younger, we'd all still be crawling. Because the
Mm,
first time you walked, you fell flat on your face. And the second time you walked, you fell flat on your face. And there
mhm.
was plenty of early networking calls that I did at Melissa's insistence. And I walked away from it going, oh my gosh, what a colossal, what was I even saying? That, I want to call and apologize to the guy. I've wasted his time. No idea what was even coming out of my mouth. Like I had to be okay crawling before I walked and walking before I ran. And even now, I sometimes stumble. And I don't mean stumble necessarily in what I'm saying, but stumble in that it's not a good connection. Yeah. And you kind of get more comfortable with that because you've had so many awesome connections in the past. You just kind of go, well, maybe they don't get it, or maybe they aren't in a good frame of mind. They're not ready to accept that this is the journey, right? And that we're all people who are trying to be in relationship with other people. I think one of the things that, and I'm not the first person to say this, of course, but one of the things that COVID has done is, of course, given us this sense that nobody has legs anymore, right? Because we only see each other from like
Right.
the shoulders up. So when I see somebody in real life now, the first thing I always joke about is, oh my gosh, you've got legs. Because I want them to know how much I appreciate they're a real person, right? And
Right.
it's funny, like the first time I met you, Melissa, I was like, I love that I met someone who's vertically challenged like myself, right?
AKA short people.
So, but it's gone the other way too. Like I've met some people that I'm like, holy cow, I had no idea you were so tall. Like it's funny because, in the days before COVID, when most of us were in office spaces together, we kind of knew those things, but it's not a given anymore. It's just
Right.
really not.
Right.
So anyway,
I like to
that's
call that phase the very beginning, like when you're first starting to network. I call it the ripping the band-aid off phase. And you
yeah.
just got to do it. You just have to start. And I feel like when I have a new client and they're like, "But what about this? But what about that?" I'll give you the basic overview and the basic coaching, but you just have to dive into it and rip the band-aid off, because it is through the experience of sort of failing or discomfort that you can reflect on where your mental and emotional blockages are. And then it really starts to unfold from there. And Melissa and I have talked about there really is no such thing as a bad networking connection. And I really like that you just highlighted, Libby, that sometimes when you do connect with someone who just doesn't get it yet, because they might not fully understand what
Right.
networking is, it's so important not to internalize that as, oh, that was just a bad connection. It's more of, like you said, it's being mindful of this person just doesn't quite grasp the benefit or the importance of having conversations, and maybe one day they will.
Mhm.
You're right. And maybe one day they'll remember that in some other setting. I mean, they may never come back to you and say, hey, thank you for really being a genuine person to me. But they may then turn around and do it for somebody else. And I've
Absolutely.
certainly had phone calls where, towards the end of it, as I'm just like reeling off people that I want to connect them to, I find them saying, Libby, if there's anything I can do to help you, if there's any, like, it's suddenly like this sort of like you can tell like these light bulbs are going off in their head, and they're like, wait a minute, who can I connect Libby to? And I wasn't necessarily looking for that. I always welcome it. I'm happy to, but I don't necessarily go into a conversation now with the I've got to get something out of it for it to be positive. I got to give something to them that is positive. What I get in return usually will be something similar because they'll want to raise their bar a little bit, right? So because I don't ever say, here, let me help you, Brittany, with some of your connections. I usually say, hey, I've got someone I really want you to meet. But again, when their light bulbs go off, they're coming back going, okay, I gotta help you. I gotta do something for you. And I'm like, that's so kind. I'm not looking for that. But
Mhm.
inevitably, of course, at some point that may come back, right? Like it really may be something that we can connect on later when I really do need an introduction or a connection, some insight, something like that.
I have a
Yeah.
question for you. You spoke about how, at first you were like, "Ugh, networking is going to be a waste of time. Like, I don't feel authentic having conversations with these people." And I think a lot of people relate to that because it's difficult for people to market themselves verbally in a conversation, and they're like, I feel like I'm brown nosing, and who am I to have these conversations and ask people for things. You talked about learning to slip into your authenticity. And if you can
Mhm.
sort of rewind the clock and really feel into what that meant for you, I'd love to sort of put a magnifying glass on that. If you could speak more about what that meant for you to lean into what was authentic for you, because I think it might help others.
Oh my gosh, you've given me a quite a long question there, Brittany, to unwind. Okay, so that's part of how I do it, right? Yeah, I allow the question or the conversation to have sort of that moment where I say, I'm just going to be myself. And if there's a cat walking in the background or a dog barking at the door, I'm going to just acknowledge it. Be like, look, see how much Hank really wants to hear more about this, right? Like, I just allow it to be there. I've done this a couple of times in presentations where, we're talking about something totally, totally on point. Um, and my counterpart might throw me the controls without sort of giving me the heads up. And I'll say, thanks a lot, Ron. So while I look like I know what I'm doing, I'm going to allow y'all to talk about a few things while I go over it. And what that does is it helps put the other person at ease
Mm,
because we all fumble. We all don't launch Zoom right, or we don't have our camera turned on, or our face is a cat. And we can't figure out how to get it off the cat. Like we've all had these, and these are real life things, right? This is really our life. We were all probably, I joke about my Zoom shirts, right? Because I'm dressed up from the waist up, but I'm not going to stand up because but again, I acknowledge that that's sort of part of our working relationship is understanding that we're all human, and the UPS guy isn't going to wait till the most convenient time to ring the doorbell and drop the package, right? Like it's going to happen in the middle of a conversation. So slipping into my authenticity is just being present in that moment and not trying to like push an agenda on somebody, and just allowing something that is like a whole kerfuffle just happen. Just let it be. It is what it is. I stumble over my words too. Everybody does. And I think that again, it humanizes you. And as you're relating to even a client or a prospect where you're really trying to get business, it creates a different kind of connection with them. And I don't know if I can really describe it other than to give you examples of that, but that really did happen where somebody was having trouble getting on a Teams meeting with me. And so I had to really allow her to see me also stumble. That was important for her to see that so that it made it feel more real. So I intentionally sometimes allow them to see just like a little side of me that goes, oh, I could have said that better. Something like that, just to kind of remind them, hey,
right.
I'm aware of my own goofiness sometimes.
Right. And it's being human. And that's part of building relationships is allowing someone to see your authenticity. And I think that's what makes you successful as someone who's a great networker because you go into every conversation being authentic. And if you fumble, you fumble and you kind of just talk through it. And the other person is, if they're fumbling, you're kind of going with it as well. You meet people where they're at. And I think, again, that's what makes you such a successful networker.
Oh, well, I would love to take credit, but it was really sort of Melissa, like it's like I was a 2-year-old in the deep end and she wanted me to learn how to swim to the side. And she said, okay, here we go. And she just punts me into the water. Now, the crazy part about that is that my mom to this day will tell you that's exactly how she taught me how to swim. Well, she
Mm,
just kind of kicked me into the deep end. Not really. I don't want anyone to get the wrong idea, but that she basically just said, you just got to
right.
go do it.
Just
So,
gotta
kind
do
of
it.
to your point, Brittany, you have to, that first time, like I said, I can remember the first person I networked with. I remember how bad it was. But after a while, there were so many good ones that I kind of forgot that occasionally,
Right.
that I felt awkward. And I remember one particular person I was trying to network with, and he was so incredibly smart, like another level smart, right? And he was like, I understand you're interested in fintech. And I was like, okay, I'm typing fintech into a Google search because I'm not really sure what it is. And I'm like, I think he's got me confused with somebody else, but that's okay. We're going to go with it. Right. And I told people later about that call, I was like, I felt like I was trying to hold on to a bull for 8 seconds. Like I was so out of my league. He was a professor. He wrote books on fintech. He's going off on fintech. I was like, I'm really just amazed at how much you know. Like I was like, I don't know what to say. Like anything that comes out of my mouth, it's going to be noticeably inferior to what you're trying to share with me. But I did appreciate that he at least gave me respect, right? Like he at least was really, really enthusiastic about his topic. I literally had no idea what he was talking about. And it just, I survived that networking call. But
Right.
I was like, I'm not introducing any of my friends to you because they're going to come back to me and go, what is he even talking about? I mean, I don't know.
Well, and I think that speaks to meeting people where they're at and
Mhm,
being who you are and just kind of going with the conversation.
mhm.
Again, you might learn something from that conversation. You took away from it what was fintech. Okay, now I know what it is. So every connection has an opportunity, and that opportunity for you was I now know what fintech is.
Right. And I, of course, am reminded that no matter how smart I think I might be, there are always folks who are in another league. Like it just, they just run in different circles than I do.
Mhm.
Right. Like I'm smarter than some, way dumber than others. So it
Yeah.
is what it is.
So if you were talking to a client who may be brand new, maybe they're just learning how to network, maybe it's been a
Mhm.
couple of weeks and they're really uncomfortable with this networking process, what advice would you give them going forward? Because, you were obviously in that spot too, where you were like, I don't know about this networking thing.
Well, I often use this as an example of, again, one of my early networking calls. I remember again, my fabulous coach said, we've got this guy in Chicago who is in IT and cybersecurity, and he wants to talk to you. And my first question to you was, why? I said, I'm in Charlotte. Own a computer and I can spell cybersecurity. Like, I don't know what it is. It sounds really, really cool, but I can guarantee you there's no way I'm going to understand what he's talking about. And you said, Libby, it's not about what he does, it's about who he is. Find out a connection. Well, because again, he's in Chicago. I know I've talked about this earlier in the podcast, but Chicago's a wonderful city and I've been there and I loved it, right? So I was like, I'm just going to focus on the Chicago part. And then the other thing that you really shared with me was, and go large when you ask for a connection. Like, don't ask for a connection for the exact job that you really think you want. Go big category, right? Just ask him if he knows someone in healthcare. I don't care where you are on the planet, everybody knows people in healthcare. So I was able to do that. Melissa, are you frozen? She's frozen. What is that? Okay, you got to cut this part out.
Yep.
I mean, you can keep me, but
It's kind of a little creepy.
it is because she's
All
got
right.
this lovely pensive look.
Oh boy.
Hello.
Oh,
We lost her
she'll come
altogether.
back. She'll come
Yeah.
back.
Da, 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 da. Would you like me to play the Jeopardy music? Dum, 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 dum.
She's been having tech problems, like major tech problems, so this is gonna infuriate her. Here she is.
Just decided to randomly, my computer just decided randomly it was going to completely shut off. So I don't know if
Here
my
we
new
go.
hour or what.
It
How
was
do
just funny
I
because I realized, okay, Melissa's no longer with me. Like she's just look. I was like,
My
there's
apologies.
no way I haven't gotten a smile out of her with what I was trying to say. So I, where I think we left off. One of the other great pieces of advice you gave me about making a connection with a random person like this, where I didn't really seemingly have much in common, was to not narrow down the type of connection I was looking for. So, in
Mhm.
other words, I've been in healthcare for a really long time. Healthcare is a huge, huge field. There's lots of different. So, your advice was just ask him if he knows someone in healthcare. Like, don't ask him if you know somebody in healthcare who's in med device who might be willing to find a way for you to get into the OR and be an OR rep, right? Like, it wasn't that tunnel vision, it was healthcare. So when he came back and said, well, I've got a really good friend of mine who's a very good networker and he's in healthcare IT, I said, well, you just sliced the universe in half. I know a lot more about healthcare IT than I will ever know about cybersecurity. So I made a connection that way and
Mhm.
then got closer. And I tell people that way you can then start narrowing your focus, right?
Right.
You start off with this broad topic. The person in healthcare IT might know someone who is, for example, in medical device, and then medical device might know somebody who's looking for an OR rep. But you
Mhm.
don't start with the first one being what you want. You
Mhm.
start with the first one just being, I mean, the big universe of IT, the big universe of supply chain, the big universe of anything, right? Automotive, what doesn't matter. That makes it that much more meaningful because they're more likely to have one in their mind.
Right.
My next door neighbor on one side of me is in banking. My next door neighbor on the other side of me is in the
Right.
restaurant business, right? So I'm like, I don't know much about either one, right?
Mhm.
But I can certainly connect you. I
Yep.
can introduce you to them. So
And that's why I guess, what we teach all the time, it speaks to that 6 degrees of separation, right?
oh
It's
yeah,
probably not going to happen on your first connection, that first level. That first level is the introductory, it's the foundation, it's the relationship building. And then
right.
from there, you're branching out. Okay, well, you might know somebody, like you said, in a different area of healthcare
Mhm.
IT, and you get closer as you move further out into the network. And most people, it's hard to realize that because it's a lot of conversation, but you do get closer to where you need to be when you're expanding your network that way.
Sure, sure. I mean, absolutely. And I think the other thing that we sort of have been taught about networking is that we have to network where we are, right? Like we have to network in Charlotte. I still don't network much in Charlotte.
Mm,
I don't, because why? I mean, that would have worked at a time when we all like moved next door to our parents, where we were
right.
across the street from neighbors that we knew our entire lives. That's
Mhm.
when networking in your own community makes sense. Why would it make sense now?
Right,
Most of my companies that I work for are headquartered some overseas, some out in
right.
California, some in Boston. Like the last thing you need to do is really network inside your little bubble. I mean, you're welcome to, but I'm saying I network all the time, but I look forward to networking with somebody from Seattle or New York or New Jersey. And I go, wow, I've never met anyone from Iowa until you, right?
Mhm.
Like that kind of sort of fun
Yeah.
that I have where I'm like, maybe I should get like one of those maps and see how close I am to covering knowing somebody in every
In
state.
every state. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's true because people do think especially if they don't want to relocate, right?
Right.
They say, I need to really network within my area. And I say, but you don't know. Someone in Austin could know someone in Boston. So
Oh, I like that.
you really do have to put yourself out there and know that you're going to network with people all over the country, sometimes all over the world.
I mean, just remind them, are you from Charlotte? Well, actually, I'm not. I'm from Charlotte via Chapel Hill via Georgia, right? So that's three different areas that I've lived long enough where I still know people in all three. So why would I think that somebody in Austin wouldn't know somebody that might live next door to me? Again, the woman opened her yearbook up and shows me my own mother, right?
Right.
It's like, what are the odds of that? I mean, she was
Yeah.
not even from well, she was from North Carolina, but she lived in like Utah or something. Like the chances of that kind of stuff happening increase as you get to know more people. You start seeing that 6 degrees of separation or as I like to say, the 6 degrees of separation of Kevin Bacon, because for some reason there's that whole generation that
Right?
realized we were only 6 degrees away from Kevin Bacon. I've never really done my 6 degrees. I doubt very seriously I'm that close to him, but that's okay. That
With all
doesn't
the
matter.
networking that you've done, you're probably closer than you think.
True.
It's possible, but
Right?
it's just, I mean, but I still, I like that concept because that was an actual study. If y'all didn't know this, that was an actual study that was
Yes.
done where
Yeah.
letters were mailed, and it was how close you could get to the person that was on the other side that you had never met before in your
Right.
life. And it
Right.
was crazy how often that worked out. But
Mhm.
again, to me, networking, you, you're gonna be bad before you're good, right? If you just go into it, it's like if you're training for a marathon, you're going to be bad before you're good. You're going to run a mile before you can run two, before you can run 12. So you just, eventually you're going to feel like, gosh, this is second nature. But we never start off with a lot of things in our lives as second nature. I mean, not even speaking. I mean, gracious knows we don't understand what 2-year-olds are saying, but they're bad before they're good. And then once they're good, we're just like, Johnny bar the door, they're not going back to the ba 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 stage, right?
Mhm.
They're going to just keep going from that. So networking
Love
is no
that.
different than that. I mean, my father taught me that when I was very, very little. He said, Libby, we know this. It's not what you know, it's who you know.
Mm.
Okay. So if
Mhm.
that's the truism, well, why are you fighting it?
Right.
Why are you fighting it?
I
Why are you still
love it.
clicking? Why are you still clicking applications?
Mic drop.
Why are you still trying to find HR? What are you doing?
Mhm.
You can either decide you're going to buck the whole game or you can be one of the best players in it.
Mhm.
Okay, I chose the latter. I'm just going to get really good at the game. Do I agree with it all the time? No, because I think people pass over excellent, excellent candidates because stuff doesn't get read or opened or understood or valued in some way. Okay. I mean, it makes it so much easier when you get a rejection because I'm like, you're a loss.
Right. Well, and then
Sometimes,
that was right. What's not meant for you will
mm-mm,
just, walk by. What's meant for you will not pass you by. Brittany says
right.
that all the time.
Yeah.
All the time, all the time. I love everything you're saying. I want to just like bottle it up, put it in a box and like
Or on
add
a
confetti
podcast,
to it
even.
and just yeah,
Speak it on our podcast.
I'm so in
I
love with
love it.
everything you're saying. And you know what I've been thinking about, Melissa? I, I've been meaning to say this to you actually on one of our meetings, not here live on the podcast, but here it is. I love that every single time we have a client come on this podcast and share their journey, we do not, and this is the honest truth for you listeners, we do not prep them in any way. We do
Nope.
not tell them what
No.
questions we're going to ask them. We don't say, oh, we really need you to say this, this, and this to corroborate everything Browning believes in. No, we don't prep you at all. We send you a Zoom invite. We say, thanks so much. We can't wait to see you on. We join on, we click record, and here it is, ladies and gentlemen. And this is just a testament to the process and it works. And every single time we have someone come on, they always talk about how uncomfortable it is at the beginning.
Right.
I don't think we've ever really had a client who came to us saying, love networking. I'm so amazing at it. And I have all these great contacts. And, sometimes people do say, yes, I know a lot of people and I have great contacts, but it's all about the network facilitation and the network mindset and the network strategy. And this is where having a coach comes in handy. Just like Libby, you keep using this amazing analogy about you have to be able to crawl and then you have to walk and then you stumble. And who's there to help you? Your parents are. And through this process here at Browning, you have your coach to be able to walk you through what your mental, what your emotional hurdles are, because everyone is so different with what it is they're struggling with. And correct me if I'm wrong, Libby, but it seems like when you first started to network, it felt really awkward. It felt really uncomfortable. You probably had the mindset of, this feels weird asking people for an opportunity. It really feels uncomfortable. And what it seems like you slipped into, and this is where you found your authenticity, was making the conversation about learning about the other person. asking them to open up and then, developing that relationship. And it seems like that is what did you wonders and what made networking start to click for you.
Well, I mean, to add to, I mean, I think you've pretty well encapsulated it, but you have to make networking yours. So again, I don't do live after fives. I'm not picking on people who do. I think that's fine if it works for them, but it doesn't work for me. So going there and standing there is kind of odd to me. Um, but I did find a way to be more engaged in networking events like that. So one of the other things that I adopted early on was this idea that I needed a networking buddy. So this is another clue about something that might work for some people. But if you're going to a breakfast speaker event or something like that, what are you doing going by yourself? You don't have to travel in the same car, but you need to have somebody there because otherwise you're sitting at a table of eight, right? Those round tables that are super awkward because like they got a purse over here and a cell phone there and a napkin folded over here. And you're like, I don't know if there's any chairs left. It's a very, very unusual and awkward thing. But I had a friend of mine who was also wanting to network more, and she became my networking buddy. So anytime the two of us could go, you would be amazed at how much more comfortable you are walking into a room full of strangers, even if you're by yourself.
Did you freeze?
Yes, and I'm petrified that the recording is messed up.
Well, it stopped and now you're recording again, right? No, yes, no.
Because it did say it was recording when I
Yeah,
logged back in.
I still have my little red light on.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it's okay. I can start from the beginning. So my name is Libby. No, just jokes, folks.
I think we've got amazing content for this podcast. I mean,
Oh,
Libby,
okay, good.
everything that you're saying is everything that we obviously teach all the time. And every client, they just, like I said, it's better to hear it from somebody who's been through the process than
Mhm,
when they hear it from us. Even if I had a client and I sent my client to John, right?
mhm. Yeah.
And John talks to them one time and then they go, "Oh, really?" And then you get furious because you for 6 months you've been saying the same thing and John talks to them once and all of a sudden it clicks. It's
Well,
crazy how that happens.
it is his name on the door. So I'm just going to say, I've never met anyone like John. He is tremendous. And of course, when I first met him, what did we talk about? Cars, because I
Right,
love cars.
right,
But again, it was a way to immediately identify and relate to one another. He likes weird cars, in my opinion. I like nice exotics. He likes these older muscle cars that nobody else has ever heard of. But that's great that he's really, really into them. But again, sometimes this is no different than being a parent. How many times have you said to your son or daughter or whatever, don't walk out into the street, don't walk out into the street, and don't walk out into the street, don't walk out into the street. And then the teacher says it one time and they don't,
right.
right? Like sometimes you just, it just takes somebody else saying it, I think, in some cases. And we just have to kind of know when to pull in the authority, right? Like when to say,
Right.
okay, so you're not listening to me. Maybe you'll listen to grandma, or maybe you'll listen to a coach, or maybe you'll listen to somebody else. And I mean, I don't know how much this really relates to networking, but I certainly think that there are some people who need to hear it more than once. And I think also that, they
Mhm.
need to have an early success. So it does help if they can connect and take if they take the I need a job yesterday off the table and say, how am I going to define success if it's not getting a job from this call? What is
Mhm.
success? Okay. Is success that they remember my name? Is it success for them at the end of the call to go, I'm really glad we had a chance to talk.
Mhm.
I'm really glad I met you. I'm, that to me became the bar, right? did I make a meaningful impact? Did I waste their time? Rather than did I get a job? And once I realized that making the impact was just as much of a victory for that day, knowing full well that in a lot of ways I'm banking some of that goodwill for the next time I run into them, knowing full well that in 2018 I met some amazing folks. And guess what? We still talk 3 and 4 times a year.
Mm-hmm.
I still will tag them on a LinkedIn post. I still will acknowledge when they've done something, remarkable in their own right on LinkedIn. And I will say, oh my gosh, great to see, John, that you're moving up or being promoted. I'll tell you this, and I found this to be delightful. This is one more connection that was one of those real stories that you can't make this up. The other day, I actually was reading an article in my industry. Of course, I'm in healthcare, and I stumbled across a competitor that I had never heard of, and they had a very, very good version of the product that we sell. And so I shared it with my manager, and he's like, "You got to find out what you can find out about them." Well, unbeknownst to my manager, as soon as I looked into it, I know the COO. This is a company that's all the way across the United States, and I networked with this person 4 years ago. So, unbeknownst to my manager,
Wow.
I reached out to him and I said, "Tell me a little bit about your product. I see you've got this great thing going." And so I'm learning things from the competitor, from the source, because I knew him. And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
what are the odds? I mean,
But you met him
but
four
I had
years
met him. I was
previous
like, wait a minute.
because you
My
networked.
phone. And then sure
Yeah.
enough, I pulled him up. I was like, oh my gosh, it's the same person. I'm like,
Yep.
well, you've done for yourself. And next
Yeah.
thing you know, we're on a quick 15-minute networking call. It was just great. It was great. And I'm so happy for him and so happy for what they're doing. But just the odds of that are so slim, and yet it happened. And it
It,
happens over and over, which
yeah.
again is why I say it's, you got to know more people. You just got to know more people, right? So it's not about it's not about the job. It's about the people who are at that job. Because here's the other reality. You're going to end up working with these folks. So if these aren't your people, that you don't have any business being there. If
Yeah.
they're not willing to make connections this way, they're not going to be the kind that are fun to hang out with at the water cooler either, right? If they're kind of jerks to you and cold shoulder you on the cell phone, I'm like, what would it be like to work with them? I feel
Right.
sorry for their family to have to put up with this. So
Yeah.
I've walked away from an interview going, I hope I don't get it. I don't
Right.
want to work with that person.
Right.
So anyway,
So much good stuff. Oh my gosh. Libby, thank you so much for taking the time with us today. As always, we appreciate and love you so much. You're our rock star, our celebrity here at
okay.
Browning, and we appreciate you. I miss you. We haven't talked in a long time.
Yeah,
Let's
yeah,
not
that
keep it so long. And thank you.
you're welcome anytime. It was a pleasure. And Brittany, it was wonderful to actually see a face with a name. And not that I didn't see you in a still shot on LinkedIn, but I'm still thrilled to be able to put the voice and inflection. And you're certainly good at what you do. You have a very good presentation style. I think y'all are perfect for a podcast. I really do. If y'all weren't doing one, I'd tell you to do one. So,
Thank you, Libby. It was a
Okay.
pleasure. And thank you to everyone who tuned in on this episode. And we will see you guys next time.
See you next time.